My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given a 6-month prognosis. She wished to spend her final days with her family, so I discussed moving her in with my husband. He flippantly responded, "Sure, if it's in the storage shed." Her wish never came to be before she passed away, and I was left in deep sorrow. To my surprise, my husband was then diagnosed with terminal cancer. When he expected me to take care of him, I couldn't hide my anger. He had ignored my mother's plight, but when it was his turn, his attitude was completely different. Outraged by his selfishness, I decided to take a stand. My name is Susan. I'm a 60-year-old housewife. Though I say housewife, I just recently took early retirement. Though it may sound strange to say so myself, until recently, I was a high-powered career woman. Though I wasn't blessed with children, I worked hard, juggling my job and household chores. But it seems I'm the only one who sees it that way. My husband, George, thinks differently. George is 3 years older than me. I got married when I was 25 through a blind date. My father used to run a small subcontracting factory, but due to economic downturn, it fell into poor management. To keep the factory afloat, my father had chosen to merge it with the company that placed the orders. That company's president's son is my husband. In other words, ours was a marriage of convenience. George was rumored to be living off his parents' coattails and seemed to have been told by others to settle down early. As for me, I was desperate to keep my father's company afloat, so I didn't really mind. Because of these circumstances, our relationship as a couple had been rather cold from the very beginning. I believe one of the reasons we couldn't build a good relationship was George's typical male chauvinism. In an era when it was natural for women to become housewives after marriage, I chose to keep working. "It's your freedom to work, but of course, you'll also take care of the house," he said. "I know that," I replied. For over a decade, I've been juggling work and household chores, but George took it for granted, and I have no memory of him ever showing gratitude. On the contrary, he complained about whatever I did. For example, one day when I served him tea after coming home from work. "Don't you have coffee instead of tea?" he asked. "I do, but it's instant coffee." "Do you think I'd drink something as common as instant coffee?" "It figures, you only graduated from high school. Hurry up and buy some from a cafe near the train station." George graduated from a prestigious private university and would sometimes look down on me like this. I've gotten used to it, so I don't talk back. "Understood, I'll go get it," I replied, just as he said. Another time, when I served grilled fish for dinner. "Don't you have meat instead of fish?" he asked. "It would take some time to make it though." "Then remake it, I'll take a bath first." Living like this, it's no wonder we're referred to as a couple in name only. However, we didn't really have a reason to split up, so we've continued our married life until now. Recently though, a new problem has arisen. It all started with the existence of a woman named Sarah, who is George's younger sister. Sarah, 8 years younger than my husband, seemed to have gotten a divorce and rolled into our home. I had no right to object, and with George's decisive say-so, it was decided that we would live together, which turned out to be the beginning of hell. Sarah, resembling my husband, had a selfish and haughty personality. Since I became a housewife, I've spent more time at home, so inevitably, I see Sarah more often. Being unable to avoid her because of work-related reasons, it troubled me. "Hey, Susan! My favorite clothes are all wrinkled. Guess you commoners can't even do laundry properly, huh?" Well, what am I supposed to do? I was so shocked by the amount of complaints about housework, which was just as bad as my husband's, I couldn't even respond. "Look at that face of yours, despite being a commoner. Iron my clothes already." All right. Did she forget that she was living here as a guest? It was a daily occurrence for Sarah to treat me like a servant. "Susan, you're free today, aren't you? I want to go shopping. Can you let me use the car? I have some things to buy too, so I don't mind." If I talked back to her here, it would just cause trouble. This was because there was a precedent. Whenever Sarah was displeased with something, she seemed to report it to George immediately, and I often got scolded by him. Not just about things that displeased her, but she also reported things that didn't happen, as if I was harassing her, which was causing me distress. The reason wasn't clear, but apparently, Sarah loved George very much and seemed to despise me. Trying to avoid being nagged at all times was mentally draining, and it was stressful to think that this life would continue forever, but I wanted to live a peaceful retirement life without causing any troubles. For now, I kept silent and did as I was told. After I dropped Sarah off at the shopping mall, during my own shopping, my smartphone rang. I received a call from an unfamiliar number. And as I answered it suspiciously, "Hello? Is this Susan Harris? Please come to the Liberty General Hospital immediately. Your mother has been urgently transported." My mind went blank at the sudden contact, and while I was lost for words, it seems a passerby found her collapsed in your home's yard and reported it, the person on the phone told me. My mother, Margaret, turned 85 this year. After my father's company merged with my husband's, he unexpectedly passed away, leaving my mother to raise me on her own. Having no siblings, my mother is my only blood relative. When I heard that she had collapsed, I couldn't keep my composure. Last New Year's, when I visited her in the apartment where she lives alone, she seemed so lively. Just as I was about to rush to the hospital, I received a call from Sarah. "Hey, Susan! Where are you right now? I've finished shopping, come and pick me up." "I'm sorry, it seems like my mother suddenly collapsed. I have to go to the hospital right now. Can you manage to get home on your own?" "What? You're just going to leave me alone? I'm sure it's nothing serious, so don't worry. Don't joke around. I'm going to the hospital anyway." While feeling frustrated with my sister-in-law who wasn't worried at all, I ended the call abruptly. I rushed to the hospital as told. When I arrived at her room, my mother had already regained consciousness. Her face, which I hadn't seen in a while, seemed a little thin. As I stood in front of the hospital room door, she noticed me and gave me a smile. Seeing her expression, I felt a sudden relief and my body felt lighter. "I'm sorry for worrying you. When I heard that you had collapsed, I freaked out. I was gardening in the yard and next thing I knew, I had fallen over. I guess I'm getting old, huh? I'm glad it's not more serious. But please take care of yourself." Looking at my mother's usual cheerful demeanor, I felt reassured, but I also realized that her age was starting to show. After that, she decided to be hospitalized for a precautionary examination. With everything going on with Sarah and my own problems, I didn't have the energy to worry about my mother. Just when I thought I had to be more mindful of her, this happened. A week after my mother collapsed. When I went to visit her as usual, she told me something. "The result of the detailed examination showed that I have terminal cancer. It's already spread to various places and my life expectancy is about half a year." "What? That can't be." "They suggested that I receive palliative care at this hospital, but if there's no chance of survival, I want to spend my remaining time with my family." My mother spoke in a calm tone, but I couldn't digest the situation and couldn't find the words to respond. I was desperately trying to hold back my tears. However, while my mother should be the one who's suffering the most, she seemed to be accepting everything and looking forward. Seeing her face, I slowly began to understand the situation. And I started to think about what I could do for her in the little time we had left. "All right. I'll talk to George about living together with you." "Thank you." That evening, when George finished eating dinner, I said, "I have something to talk about." "What is it?" "You need to talk about it now?" "I went to the hospital today, and they found out that my mother has terminal cancer. It seems like she only has about half a year left." I had acted strong in front of my mother, but as I remembered the conversation from earlier, I felt the tears welling up again. "So? What do you want me to do about it?" My husband George fiddled with his smartphone in a way that left me unsure whether he was listening or not, but I continued nevertheless. Mom says she wants to spend her last days with her family. She won't be a burden, so is it okay if she lives with us in our house? Huh? What are you talking about, Susan? That's impossible, obviously. Excuse me? I was momentarily taken aback by his unexpected response. Didn't you hear me? I said it's impossible. Why not? I'll take care of Mom. I don't see any problem with that. Why should we live with someone who could kick the bucket any moment, huh? Isn't the hospital going to provide palliative care? She can be taken care of there along with other old folks, right? I agree with George. I wouldn't want to spend even a second with someone who's about to die. Suddenly, Sarah butted in. It seemed like she was still holding a grudge for being left at the mall. I felt my blood boil at their callousness. Well, if you insist, we have a small shed that's okay for her to stay in. Great idea, George. That's not fair. I was desperate for them to take me seriously, but instead, they brushed me off like I was some kind of joke. What were they thinking? I'd put up with their antics before, but this was the last straw. I clenched my fists, struggling to suppress the urge to lash out. I've said it before, she won't be a burden. I'll take care of everything and she can stay in my room. That's not the point. Yeah, we already have one shabby old person around here. We can't even think about adding another. It'll suck the life out of us. That's hilarious. Talking to them was pointless. My heart was a mess, filled with hatred and anger towards them. I stormed out of the house, and before I knew it, I was standing in front of the hospital where my mother was admitted. I was torn about how to relay what they had said, but it seemed like I had to tell her the truth. As I entered her room with a heavy heart, she smiled at me. It didn't work out, did it? How could you know that? You've never been good at hiding things. I can tell just by looking at you. I'm sorry for putting you through this. Why are you apologizing, Mom? I was furious and frustrated with myself for not being able to fulfill even this one wish of my beloved mother. I'll stay at the hospital. I've saved up a bit of money, and I don't want to burden you, Susan. There's no burden. In fact, I want to live with you. That was the truth. Seeing their behavior, I'd reached the end of my patience. I had no idea they could be so heartless. I'd rather leave home than live under the same roof as them. I'm glad to hear you say that. But if you could come visit me once a week, that would be enough. Mom, just wait a little longer. I'll find us a house to live in together. Thank you, dear. Looking back, it seems that my mother already knew that her days were numbered. Her condition took a turn for the worse and she passed away a few days later. Sadly, I heard the news while I was signing a lease for an apartment I had found for us. It was all so sudden that I was left in a daze, unable to focus on anything, living my days like an empty shell. Even when George and Sarah berated me, I didn't feel anything. In this state of feeling like there was a gaping hole in my heart, I had to act as the chief mourner for my mother's funeral. When I was selecting a picture for the memorial service, my memories with my mom came rushing back so vividly, big tears started to fall from my eyes, and I couldn't stop them. With me beside them, neither George nor Sarah bothered to help with the funeral arrangements. Instead, they were laughing out loud saying, "Told ya so, huh? Should have listened to us, right? And never thought it would end so abruptly, huh?" With my eyes red from crying, I glared at them. "Geez, that's scary. We didn't cause this, you know? George, are you okay? You've been coughing a lot recently, haven't you?" "I'm fine." I couldn't be bothered with George's cough. I was preoccupied with my own problems. Just when my mother's funeral was over and my wounds started to gradually heal, George spoke to me with a solemn expression. Honestly, I hadn't felt like talking to him at all since that incident. But, since it was unusual for George to initiate a conversation, I decided to at least pretend to listen while I was doing housework. "Turns out, I've got terminal lung cancer." "I'm sorry, who does?" "Obviously me." Haven't you noticed my constant coughing lately? Sure enough, George was a smoker. I was surprised that it was lung cancer, but a part of me was calmly wondering, so what now? So, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. I, the breadwinner of the family, have a serious illness. It's your duty as a wife to take care of me. Maybe George didn't like my indifferent response, because he suddenly raised his voice. Is he really serious? After totally disregarding my mother's situation, he's now behaving like this just because it's about him. I couldn't hide my anger at my self-centered husband. Taking care of him is my duty as his wife? Give me a break. I might as well quit being his wife right now. I decided to strike back. Stop joking around. There's no way anyone would joke about having terminal lung cancer. Just goes to show how much of an idiot you are, only having a high school education. Although I was left speechless by my husband's condescending attitude, I replied in a cold voice, "The idiot here is you." What did you just say? I said, please stop joking around with asking me to take care of you. If it's the wife's duty, then I quit being your wife right now. Saying that, I put the divorce papers on the table. Hey, what's the meaning of this? It's just as it looks. There's no way we're getting a divorce, especially now when I'm going through such a hard time. You didn't help me during my hard times, did you? You even abandoned my mother, Susan accused. That's a different issue altogether. George retorted, losing a bit of his usual composure. He probably hadn't expected that I would file for divorce. The timing and reason for the divorce was all I needed. I had decided at some point that it would happen. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that I waited until the time was ripe, considering my mother's situation too. I can't live with someone who's unpredictable, I stated. What? Having completely forgotten, I returned the exact words he once said to me. You trampled on my mother's wish to spend her final moments with her family with these words. Cut it out. If you need someone to look after you, why not ask Sarah? Even if you refuse to sign, I'm leaving this house. You serious? You're gonna regret it when you realize you've got nowhere to go. I'm not bluffing or acting impulsively. I'm not as stupid as my husband thinks I am. So, this is the end of the discussion. I'll be leaving this house by tomorrow. Hey! Wait a minute. I heard my husband's voice from behind me, but I ignored him and went into my room. The next day, as I declared, I packed my belongings and left the house. My destination was a rented apartment I contracted for living with my mother. When I received the keys from the real estate agent and entered the room, I felt a pang in my chest thinking it was supposed to be a place to live with my mother. As soon as the moving company had delivered my belongings, the first thing I did was to retrieve my mother's photo from one of the cardboard boxes. I set it up in the sunniest spot in the room and adorned it with her favorite flowers. Having successfully left my house, I decided to carry out my next plan. One day, as I was settling into my new room and unpacking, I received a call from a familiar number. As I was expecting the call around this time, I answered the phone with a calm tone. Hello. What the hell is this document? Oh, you seem surprisingly well. I thought it would be hard for you to read, so I sent it to Sarah. I had considered my seriously ill husband when I made this decision. It seems he got it from his sister. Susan, where the hell are you? Just because you have a grudge against George, doesn't mean you can make unreasonable demands for asset division. Judging from the situation, it seemed the two of them were together. For me, it was quicker to talk if they were together. Sarah, do you really think I would send such a claim without reason? What? What do you mean? It means I have concrete proof. Proof of his affair. I felt like I heard both of them gasp on the other side of the phone. I found out about my husband's affair thanks to my mother's will. When I was choosing a photo for the funeral, I found an envelope in the album. Judging from the date written, it seemed to have been written long before my mother collapsed. She must have written it to me so that I would be prepared for anything considering her age. Most of it was about inheritance, as one would expect from a will. However, it was written that my mother had something she had been keeping silent about. What did it say? My mom's friend who runs a bar saw someone who looked just like you, bringing a woman there. This friend attended my mom's funeral, so I decided to ask her for the truth. Is there a regular customer at your bar who is here right now? That's sneaky. Ignoring my husband, I calmly continued with the story. The most important part was to come. I was taken aback. I never anticipated you two would be the ones pointed out. I thought it might be a mistake, so I checked again, but it was confirmed. At first, when I heard it, I was completely confused. An affair between siblings is unthinkable. But what if they weren't siblings? It was an absurd idea, but a hypothesis popped into my head. I hired a private investigator to do some research. You're not Sarah, George's sister, are you? What? I had forgotten Sarah's face. Last I saw her was at our wedding, and I was completely fooled. Should I call you by your real name, the mistress, Naomi? You even know my name. Hey! Well, if you've figured it out this much, there's nothing we can do. I'm tired of pretending to be siblings. It seems like George's mistress has finally given up. Perhaps George had no intention of confessing, and it seemed like they were about to start a lover's quarrel over the phone, so I cleared my throat. It was not meant to be sarcastic towards George, but it seemed to redirect the attention of the two towards me again. Can we get back to the story? I said in a calm voice. How did you know I'm not George's sister? Naomi asked in a puzzled voice. Well, the first thing that struck me as odd was that your relationship seemed too close for siblings, and I was curious about why you seemed to dislike me. I see. I knew you had divorced, but it was strange that George was so defensive. I thought you were dumb. Well, certainly, I was a fool for going along with whatever George said back then. The thought of living under the same roof with my husband's mistress without realizing it makes me sick. Now it makes sense why you didn't want to live with my mother. So you've seen through it all. But is it okay? After all, you left the house, and you're planning on divorcing George, right? This works out well for us. Didn't I tell you? I'm putting the house up for sale. What? You're doing what? Yes, that house was originally owned by my parents. Meaning, now that my mother has passed away, I am the inheritor. This was also something my mother left in her will. Since I've already moved to a new place, it's my call what to do with the house. Therefore, despite the house being filled with memories of my childhood, I've decided to sell it for financial support for my future. I'd like you to take a close look at this document. The money claim is not just against the husband, you know. Wait a minute. It's jointly signed. Well, if I'm going to divorce you, you'll have to pay the price. Hold on. I have hospital bills and surgery costs coming up. I can't possibly afford this amount. What am I supposed to live on if the house is sold? You plan to leave us out on the streets? Can't we calmly discuss this? I wonder where there's room for a calm discussion. At last realizing their position, the two began to wail. Yeah, that's right. We'll come to your place. Please, let's discuss this calmly. I'll even apologize for what happened in the past. Susan, can you tell us where you are? We want to meet and apologize. Even if you apologize, it doesn't mean my mother is coming back. Live happily ever after and don't ever contact me again. No. I could picture the two of them breaking down in tears on the other end of the line, but I hung up without giving them a chance to speak. After that, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-husband, George, had to be hospitalized. Despite all his mockery, he's now receiving palliative care in a shared room with others suffering from the same illness. Apparently, it's challenging for him to work, and he's stretching his limits just to pay his medical bills. The payments for my damages seem to be on hold for the time being, but it seems that George's company decided to step in. Incidentally, The reason George had to be hospitalized was because he was abandoned by the woman he was having an affair with. It seems that even the mistress found it bothersome to care for George. Even though she abandoned George, it doesn't mean that the mistress's damages payments are nullified. It's a considerable amount for her current job, so she seems to be working tirelessly day and night. You could say it's a punishment for treating me like a slave and living in leisure. She seems to have tightened her belt considerably, losing weight drastically, and supposedly regretting what she did to me. She seemed to have tried to contact me several times through George, but I ignored them all. As for me, I've been living a comfortable retirement life with the funds from selling the house and the stocks my mother held. Surprisingly, these stocks were from the company where George works. In other words, it turns out that the company my father used to run was merged with the company where George works. Given the percentage of stocks I hold, I even have the right to speak at shareholder meetings. Perhaps my mother was trying to reclaim my father's factory someday. I could have dismissed George from his executive position at the shareholders' meeting, but I decided not to, as it could delay the payment of damages. Above all, I felt that my mother would not be pleased with any further revenge. The best way I could honor my parents is by living as long as possible, for both me and my mother. It seemed like the photo of my mother was always smiling with her usual smile.